We didn't even live in a small town. We lived in the rural area. Even as a child, I was always very curious about other places. A lot of times in my life, I have been told, oh, you can't do that. One of the things that inspired me so much about the outdoors is that nobody could tell me I couldn't. As long as I had the strength to hike that far, hike that high, ski that far, whatever, I would do it.
Hey there, adventure seekers. I'm Kenny, host of the Novel World Travels podcast, where I'll explore the transformative power of experience. Dive deep with me as I chat with extraordinary people, uncovering the lessons hidden in their journeys, the good, the bad, and the life-changing. Live vicariously, embrace new perspectives, and grow along with me on the Novel World Travels podcast. Hey everybody, this is Kenny from Novel World Travels podcast. Today I'm excited to join my friend Clyda, a remarkable woman who hails from a small town in northeast Arkansas, but has gone on to lead an extraordinary life, an eventful life of global exploration and adventure. Now based in Colorado, Clyda balanced a 20-year career in education with a lifelong passion for travel, mountaineering, hiking, cross-country skiing in the Rocky Mountains. In fact, she has conquered an impressive 50 of Colorado's renowned 14ers, peaks over 14,000 feet in elevation. But Clyda's adventurous spirit has taken her beyond the American West, including living and working abroad, scaling volcanoes as high as 18,500 feet in Mexico, and even circumnavigating the globe. Her pursuit of new experiences and challenges in the great outdoors is truly inspiring. I'm excited to share how Clyda's perspectives on travel, outdoor pursuits, and what it means for a woman to embrace such an extraordinary lifestyle has been shaped by her isolated small town roots and her eventful life experience. Welcome, Clyda, and thanks for talking with me.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, can you tell me about your upbringing in that small town in northeast Arkansas, and what first sparked your interest in exploration, travel, and outdoor adventures?
Well, we didn't even live in a small town. We lived in the rural area, and it was all cotton, corn, soybean farming, and it was isolating. And my family couldn't afford vacations very much. When we went on a vacation, it was to visit grandparents in southwestern Arkansas. So I had never really traveled until I had graduated from college and was teaching in St. Louis County, Missouri. But even as a child, I was always very curious about other places and enjoyed looking at atlases or maps or whatever, and always wanted to find out. I think a great part of my curiosity was, how do other people live in other places? How do people live in Africa or China or South America, even as a child? So after I had taught for a couple of years, I took a job with the American Red Cross in South Korea and worked there 14 months. And then I and two other women traveled the long way home. We went west instead of going back east to the United States. Wow. So that meant that I had circumnavigated the earth in one direction in about 17 or 18 months.
Wow.
Without ever backtracking. So, and that was, of course, it just whetted my appetite for traveling even more.
Was that your first time abroad when you went to Korea?
Yes, that was my first time abroad. Lived in in an Asian culture that was very different. And that was the early 60s. So Korea was still very poor. It was only 10 years after the Korean War was over.
Wow.
So it was quite an experience to be in such a different culture and to learn about how they lived. And of course, place, I insist that place determines culture. The place determines how a group of people civilize and construct their society.
Let's get back to that in a second, but I wanted to mention and share also with the listeners. I can identify with that, growing up in a place and looking at an atlas. I remember my mom put maps on my wall. I had an American a map of the United States and then also the world map. And I wasn't always the best kid, so sometimes she'd seclude me to the room for a bit, and I'd just look at the map and wonder, where is this place? Where is Scotland? What do they do there? What do they do in the Federated States of Micronesia in the Pacific? And, and I always had that curiosity of what was going on, because I knew life was not just the way I lived it. Yeah. Other people, some of the common things we have in common around the world is, we all have to eat, sleep. We want to take care of our families, but we all do it in different ways. Yes. So with that said, you've immersed yourself in diverse cultures through experiences like living in South Korea. Can you share what those cross-cultural experiences have taught you and how they've impacted your perspective?
Well, if my idea is that if a person travels with an open mind and an open heart to learn about other cultures without a great deal of judgment, because, we have our culture, and America has always been such a powerful country and such a rich country. It's very easy to travel as an American and to be judgmental and open-minded, close-minded to other cultures. But I was never that person, because I wanted to experience where I was. I learned so much, and that was one of the primary reasons I wanted to travel, is not only to see places and to learn about cultures, but to become educated about how other people live.
So in Korea, you never stepped foot in this country before. You land there. What are some of the first things you can recall that struck you as with the difference in culture?
Back then, they dressed differently. If anybody, by then, I should say that young people were beginning to dress in Western clothing, because the influence of the American military being there for so long was very strong. But older people still dressed in the traditional dress. And of course, it was very poor. Streets were still dirt streets, and there were very few highways. And the rural areas were mostly rice paddies.
Oh, wow.
And it was just really different.
Was it a fearful experience? Was there any anxiety about going to a new place?
No.
No? Excitement?
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. So you've balanced your career and education with decades of hiking, climbing, experiencing remote areas and challenging environments. How have your travels and adventures shaped your worldview and sense of self?
As I said before, if a person travels with an open mind about how cultures exist and how they came about, and with a non-judgmental attitude, my worldview is that we're all a part of humanity. We're all humanity. We're all relatives. Yes, there are exceedingly different cultures around the world. So my worldview is that I'm curious, always curious about how a culture got to be the way it is. Now, of course, there are aspects of cultures around the world that are diametrically opposed to many of the aspects of culture that we have here.
Sure.
And sometimes they're in conflict. But at the same time, I think that calls upon the traveler to understand how those cultures develop in such different ways. I don't think it's any accident that Western Asia, as they're called now, in other words, the Middle East and Central Asia, it's no accident that they happen to be Arab. That's where the religion came about.
Yeah.
So, of course. And Christianity was brought to this continent by the first immigrants from England and Europe. So the cultures came about because of people traveling, basically, for various reasons, of course.
Sure. Traveling's always been a part of humanity, and having new experiences in general, you know, and that's sort of the sort of idea I always like to focus on, because it can really transform you to experience a new thing. You can sit in your living room and you can stare at TV, or you can, I mean, you know, reading is wonderful, but if that's all you do and you experience the world that way, you don't have a full understanding of how things are.
Yes.
So, yeah, what other cultures have struck you? I mean, you've traveled the world. I think you mentioned before in a conversation you've been to Turkey. You spent time with the Native Americans, and
of course, if you go to South America, if a person from the United States is not familiar with the history of South America, some people still think that South America is all those dark-skinned native tribes, and you know, they're like the Peruvians, the native Peruvians. But that's not true, because it was so overcome by colonialism that much of South America is a very Western but Catholic and more like Spain than like not Aztecs,
Inca
tribes. South American of European heritage are mostly Catholic. So that's part of the history that helps to form their culture.
Sure.
And then there are many tribes still indigenous in South America, like the Inca, who practiced their own religion, their own native religion.
Sure. Have you traveled around South America quite a bit?
Not a lot. Let's see. The first trip was to Chile, and then down to the southern part where we did what's called the Cruce de Lagos, the cruise of the lakes, and you travel from the Pacific Ocean across 5 lakes into Argentina, into the city of Bariloche, Argentina.
I want to visit Argentina.
Yeah, I loved Argentina. I'd like to go back
Seems
there.
Beautiful.
But, and then up to Brazil, not Sao Paulo, but what's the other big city in Brazil? I can't think of it. The capital. No, it's not the capital. The capital is way out in the middle of nowhere. We made it a point to go to Iguazu Falls, which are the largest falls, extensive falls in the world. And before we left there, we dipped into Paraguay. No, that was before we went to Brazil. So that was 4 or 5 countries in one tour. But then several years later, I went back with just 5 people from Boulder, and we traveled for almost 3 weeks in Peru. And I really, really enjoyed that very much.
So speaking of South America, not to interrupt you, but let's cover the continents. Let's start there. So you've been to Europe, obviously.
I've been to Europe,
Asia,
South America, and of course the North American continent. New Zealand doesn't count, I think, because it's their islands separated from Australia. But I think Australia is considered one of the continents.
Yes, and you haven't visited Australia?
No, didn't go to Australia. Okay. I always thought I would, but after I had been to England and to New Zealand, I just told myself I don't have to go to Australia, because it's very British.
Yeah,
it's very British.
Derivative culture.
Yes, derivative culture.
Interesting.
But I haven't been to South America. I mean, the Arctic or the Antarctic.
I'm going to hit all those continents for you. Yeah. I'm going to go to them. I'm going even in Antarctica. My daughter's grandfather's been down there, and every time I run into him, I'm asking him about that. I mean, in particular, I mean, you know, there's actually quite a bit of history down there, believe it or not. Of course. And then, you know, this is a bit controversial, but some people in some ancient texts talk about land down there, and they talk about some of the things that had happened in the past. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they found flash frozen ancient animals down there. So,
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it at all.
Yeah, really.
Archaeology and science are still discovering things about this earth that we never knew.
And that's so exciting.
Yes.
It's so exciting that you want to know, but it's exciting that the mystery is what leads you out there and what gets you moving. And that's why I love traveling. So let me ask you, so climbing 50 of Colorado's 14ers is a incredible accomplishment. Well, what has that process been like? And what have you learned about yourself through mountaineering challenges?
Well, I learned perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that inspired me so much about the outdoors is that nobody could tell me I couldn't. As long as I had the strength to hike that far, hike that high, ski that far, whatever, I would do it because I grew up in the 50s as a teenager.
Sure.
And of course, that was the silent generation. It was before the feminist movement.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times in my life, I have been told, "Oh, you can't do that." So part of the inspiration was, yes, I can do that. And nobody can stop me. There's nobody at the trailhead who says you can't go there.
It's there for you to take if you want to.
It's there for you to do if you want to. And the mountains were always my spiritual home. I think I can understand a little bit of the Native American attitude toward the natural world in that was the place I went for healing and meditation and spiritual thinking and rest, to be restored from the stress and negativism sometimes of living in a civilized world, so-called civilized world.
When did you first discover that was your spiritual home? I mean, when you
after a few years of going into the mountains.
And you'd reflect a lot there.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you remember your first 14er?
Yes, I think it was an easy one, Gray's Peak.
Okay.
Which is over by Georgetown.
Okay.
It's only a few miles to the top.
Sure.
Or Bierstadt. It might have been Bierstadt. Bierstadt is probably the easiest one because you can drive to the top of the pass and then it's like 2.5 miles or 3 miles to the summit and you don't have to gain much elevation.
What was your most difficult climb?
Oh.
And what went into preparing for that?
I climbed all the bells, the Maroon Bells.
Okay. And where are they?
They're near Aspen. They're just south and a bit south and southwest of the city of Aspen. And you have to go up a valley.
Okay.
And then hike, and climb from there. That might have been the most frightening experience.
The most frightening experience?
Yeah, because they're very dangerous. The rock is very soft in that it flakes very easily. It's so it's the accident rate and the death rate on those peaks is probably the highest of all the 14ers in Colorado.
Wow.
So I was glad when that was open. I have a picture of myself at the parking lot after I got back going, thank you, God.
But I mean, from my experience, and you can share your perspective, from my experience, when you do something that is dangerous or seems a bit scary, when you're done, it's that much more of an accomplishment.
Yes.
Yes. And it does something for you.
Well, and it strengthens your own confidence in what you can do physically.
Right.
And mentally. Sometimes it's a lot of mental. I was never much of a rock climber because I just didn't have the mental stability for it. I was too frightened rock climbing.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Did a little bit, but I mostly learned how to rock climb just in case I had to make a few moves when I was getting up a mountain.
What drew you to that sort of activity, just climbing mountains? And
well, I came to Boulder with my ex-husband in 1967, and he had already been out here in the West. He had been up had worked for a summer in Rocky Mountain National Park. And when we came out on a summer trip and came through Boulder and Colorado, we both agreed that we wanted to live near the mountains. Now, in Korea, I had hiked up a high peak near Seoul, and that was actually my first time ever being out hiking and going up to the top of a mountain. And I really enjoyed it. So I was very happy to move here because, in Boulder, you're close to the mountains all over Colorado.
Sure.
And
were there any mountains in Northeast Arkansas?
Well, they call them mountains.
Yeah, but not compared to what you've...
Not compared to Colorado or the Rocky Mountains.
No.
No.
Interesting.
The Ouachitas, the Boston Mountains, the Ozarks, they're all on the western side of Arkansas.
In your experience as a woman navigating the world of exploration, travel, adventure, what unique considerations or perspectives have you had to take into account?
Well, one of the things that I perceived in those early years, of course, I did a lot of hiking with my ex-husband, but then with the Colorado Mountain Club afterwards, after the divorce. And I could certainly tell that there were lots of women were hiking too, even at that time, but not so many doing the 14ers. Now it's just, that's ordinary, almost ordinary for young people to be mountaineering and for women to be. Some of the world's finest rock climbers are women now, but that's been a growth of that sport and a growth of a woman's place in Western culture over 50 years has put those women into that category. But
you were, in some sense, you might be too humble to admit, but because you were participating in early, you were somewhat of a pioneer in that. I mean, there weren't many. I mean, if there weren't many women doing it, and some may have. You mentioned how when you went out there, there's no one to tell you no, and you did it. You did it. Despite what people out here in society might have thought.
Yes.
And now that there are more women doing that, I think that attitude sort of got bigger and rolled downhill, and more people have that. And in that sense, it appears that you're somewhat of a pioneer with that attitude of being able to go up there.
Maybe a little bit. But I could perceive from time to time that there were attitudes from both men and women that, you can't do that.
Really? From women also?
Yes.
How did that feel?
Well, maybe they didn't have as much experience as I did and didn't trust me as much. I mean, even now I talk to people about, that I spent a lot of time in the mountains and this, that, and the other. They don't know what I'm talking about. You have to have that experience to understand it. And so even now especially men, I guess, if don't understand what a woman is talking about with that kind of sport and athleticism, there's often doubt of what you actually were doing. But that's just lack of experience, so differences in life experience.
Sure. Yeah. That's often the case, when you have a particular experience that you can't share. My dad and I have spoken about that. He talks about his experience in combat in Vietnam, and there's not everybody can understand.
No.
That sort of thing. And I mean, that's not maybe the greatest example, but I mean, everybody has it. Many people have that sort of thing, and I can imagine.
It's a very good example of how there's no way of telling somebody and making them understand certain experiences.
Sure, you have to be there. You have to smell the air, feel the experience, and see the particulars and nuances of whatever experience you have. You can, and that's why it's important to. I can watch a documentary about the bells and about the 14ers, but I don't know how cold it gets up there. I can't feel that. That's in your soul now. I don't know the effort it took and the equipment and preparation for that day that you had to. What you had to do to get ready. So really interesting. Are there any, we touched on this earlier, but are there any experiences or places that were particularly transformative to you?
I can't really choose individual places, but part of my inspiration came from the beauty of the mountains, just the aesthetic appeal of it all. Because if you've never hiked in the high country, in Colorado in the summer, when the wildflowers in bloom, there's no way of understanding. You can see those pictures, but if you haven't walked through a valley that's just covered in wildflowers in the summertime, there's no way of explaining the aesthetic appeal of it, how beautiful it is. I still hope I can even get to Brainerd Lake, which is only 10,000 feet, so I can see the wildflowers again. Yeah. But that was part of my inspiration for hiking and mountaineering, is because I wanted to go to the beautiful valleys and the places where I knew I would see the gorgeous scenery and the wildflowers and some wildlife, of course.
You you're in a different phase of life, so you're not as active doing that sort of thing now. How does it feel to reflect on that? Do you ever have desire? I mean, maybe not the ability, the desire to get out there and experience the mountains or the same way?
Yes, I do. I wish I could.
Yeah.
But at this point in my life, I don't have time. You know, I'm trying to downsize my house and go to independent living. So there's just not enough time. And especially there's not enough time to stay in condition to do that. You really have to work at the conditioning.
Stay in condition.
Yes, that's athletically, physically, you have to stay in condition. You don't just decide you're going to go. The average person shouldn't think in terms of just, oh, I think I'd like to go up to Rocky Mountain National Park and I'd like to hike to Black Lake. Well, if you're not an athlete or a runner or something, you're not going to get to Black Lake.
You're going to have a hard time.
Because it's too hard.
Really?
Because of the altitude.
What goes into maintaining that conditioning? Just staying consistent, or do you work out?
Lots of exercise.
Really?
And of course, some people are just naturally so strong, they don't have to do a lot of exercise. I always had, when I first started mountaineering and hiking in Colorado, I was in my late 20s. It makes a lot of difference.
Sure.
And 30s, 40s, and even when I was in my 60s. But as you get older, you don't have that, you lose the strength, and it's much harder to stay in condition. And then you have to spend more time exercising, gymnastics, walking, hiking, running, whatever keeps you in good condition. Because it's a conditioning, it's a sport of conditioning. It really is.
And walk me through your particular ways that you stay in condition. Did you do particular exercises at home, or did you go to the gym, or did you walk?
Well, in my 20s, I didn't have to. Late 20s, even into the 30s. Into the 40s, I started doing short hikes. You know, you go out on the weekends and maybe do a 5-mile hike, which 2.5 miles one way and 2.5 back.
Okay. And
regularly doing short hikes, or even just hiking on the trails in Boulder is conditioning. To me, there's no better conditioning than being on a trail and walking on a trail, because it requires more balance. It requires being in touch with your feet a lot more than walking on the treadmill at the gym. But as I got older, I had to do more conditioning, and now I don't have time for the conditioning.
Yeah. If you can recall, what are some of the most strange, weird, or out of the ordinary experiences that you have seen or participated in?
Oh, well, in travel or mountaineering?
In general, again, travel is important, but just new experiences. So what's anything, it doesn't have to be related.
Well, I'll try to make this short, but there was one episode in Cambodia and this was 1963, not so many Americans were traveling from Phnom Penh, Cambodia to Angkor Wat,
Okay.
which was one of the most famous ancestral, an ancient kingdom.
Okay.
In northern Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
But we got on a bus, with the chickens and the little pigs on the top, and all the people scrunched in together. And it was supposed to be about a 3 or 4 hour trip. But about an hour into the trip, the bus stopped. And the men all get out and they look at the motor and blah, 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 and they get it started again. And about an hour later or a half an hour later, it stops again. And then we realized there was a gas tank on top of the bus, and there was a gas line that you could see going down into the motor. And when they got it fixed, we got back in the bus, you could see the gas running out down that plastic pipe. And the men would get out and they were all smoking, and then we began to smell gas. And at that point, we told them we were afraid we were going to get fried in the middle of nowhere. Nobody would have known where we were. Our parents, nobody would have known that we were in northern Cambodia, and we got fried. Wow. So we got out in a little village and had our tickets with us, and made it clear to the bus driver that we wanted to get on the next bus. And he went his way and we got on the next bus.
Wow.
But if we hadn't understood what was going on, and these guys are all smoking out there and it's smelling of gasoline. So we've always remembered that as that could have been a close call.
Right. Is that something, I mean, you've traveled quite a bit and experienced a lot. Have you had many close calls?
No.
No, not really.
No. We had an episode in the Philippines that wasn't exactly a close call, but it was a result of poor judgment on our part. And it's back then, I mean, we were naive. We hadn't done all that much traveling. Mm-hmm. And we did a few things that were out of naivete that could have turned into a
And where was this, Philippines?
In the Philippines.
I mean, yeah. I'd love to hear it.
Well, we met a couple of men in Manila that were interested in talking to us, and we discovered that they worked in the government and they spoke English well, and they were articulate, they were educated, and they had government jobs. And we wanted to go to a vacation spot called Baguio, which was in the mountains of the main island. I've forgotten what the main island of the Philippines is, but it's some 3 or 4 hours, 3 hours from Manila. Back then it was up into the hills. It was very cool there, and it was a vacation spot. And they offered to take us there because one of their friends was with the government, and he needed to go to a village because this village was getting a government grant or money, and he needed to visit them. And so the three of us went with them, and we just went. Yeah, we went with the 3 men and the 3 of us, and they stopped at the village, and then they wanted to stop and take the usual siesta. And we got quite uncomfortable with this. Sure. And finally, we managed to tell them, we're going to Baguio or we're getting out of the car.
Okay.
And so they took us to Baguio. And then when we got to Baguio, they wanted us to go to the bar with them. And we said no. And we went to our rooms and locked the doors. And that was not a smart thing to do, is to go across country with those 3 Filipino, even if they were in the government. The night before, they had invited us to a bar to meet a man, and then they switched to Tagalog, the local language, and they were talking politics. And once in a while, one of the men would say, "Oh, we're talking about so and so." The next day, there was a coup in the Philippine government, and that man that we were in the bar with had been part of the coup.
Oh wow!
And we were going, oh, oh, we should be more careful. You can
Wow.
get swept up in something like that,
Sure.
end up in jail, and nobody will know where you are.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it can happen even nowadays. But, we were pretty naive. By the time we got through 2 or 3 countries, we learned to be more careful.
Sure. I can't believe you're going to withhold that story. That's so interesting. Also, I wanted to mention to anyone listening, Clyde and I went down to the Hopi Reservation together. We drove, where did we drive? Up 70 through the mountains. She showed me, because I'd never been deep into the mountains yet. And we drove through there, through the Southwest.
We drove to Grand Junction first,
mm-hmm.
and then from Grand Junction through Moab, and from Moab down to Blanding, and then from Blanding down to where you go south, and then you turn west and get to Hopi. And we were near the first mesa on the Hopi land. We were staying in a little bitty corner of the Navajo reservation, but we did our volunteer work on near the first mesa of the Hopi reservation.
Yeah. That was such a wonderful trip. It was so cool. Was Blanding the place where we stayed on the farm with the horses?
Where the horses were. Yes.
Yeah. That was such a, I'd been all over the United States. I've been to nearly, I think it's 42 or 43 states, but the Southwest is a place that I haven't spent much time, which is a place that you spend some time. Yes. And it was really a pleasure to experience that with you. I mean, she showed me all these beautiful places that you have to actually go and see it. She was mentioning earlier how you can look in a magazine, you can look on TV, but you can't see the beauty of these places unless you go.
And you can't comprehend the vastness of the Red Rock country in southern Utah and Arizona, and
I went to
western New Mexico.
I'd seen a million pictures and a million documentaries and things of that nature of the Grand Canyon.
Yes.
But the day I went there, it's just, you can't comprehend how massive that place is.
Well, and I tell people all the time, of course I haven't been all over the world, but I've looked at enough maps and seen enough documentaries and, looked at enough atlases to know that the Grand Circle, as it's called, that encompasses southeast Utah, northwestern New Mexico, and the lower part of southwestern Colorado and northeastern Arizona, there is no spot on the face of the earth that has the vastness of the Red Rock country, the sandstone and Red Rock country, which implies desert country, as any place in the world.
Wow. Now,
Jordan has a very large area of Red Rock country, and it has become a climbing mecca. I went through Jordan with that around the world trip and really liked the country and the place. And they're getting a lot of rock climbing because of the Red Rock country, but it's not nearly as vast as the Colorado Plateau.
Okay.
And the Utah Plateau. It's all a very high plateau, and it's desert. But I tell people, you just can't understand how vast this is. And to me, it's really exciting. I hope I can get back out there again before it's too late.
Sure. All right. So I do have one more question. We're leaning towards the end, but I do want to talk to my listeners and tell them something. And now, you may not have known this, but you and I have somewhat of a disagreement with the use of maps and Google Maps.
Okay,
so let me mention that she is not a fan of Google Maps, and I can understand, because it's ingrained in her to navigate. She's went through mountains. She's traveled this world using maps, and I've loved maps. But I generally now, I look at maps, I use them. I generally now use Google Maps to navigate. So help us understand your issue with Google Maps.
Well, it's not that I really Kenny, it's not that I have an issue with Google Maps.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go to Denver, I will also look at Google.
Gotcha.
Because I'm just wanting to find a street and an
Sure.
address and a place.
Mm-hmm.
But if I plan to go to a foreign country, I want a map of that country so that I can educate myself. Where in the world is that country?
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of land
Mm-hmm.
is it? What countries border
Sure.
that other country?
Sure.
Because place determines culture.
Right.
In
Right.
my opinion.
That's absolutely
Place
the case.
determines culture. And even if you're traveling in the United States, well, you know where Maryland is, or
Sure.
you know where Vermont or Oregon is,
Mm-hmm.
but and you can get there by just doing Google Maps.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Easily enough. But I have yet to see someone working on Google who looks at the broader. I mean, can you get the whole state in Google Maps that has enough definition
Mm-hmm.
with the topography and the geography of it all to really understand where and what kind of place it is?
Mm-hmm.
Doubtful. I doubt it. I mean, maybe somebody who's more skilled on the computer than I am can show me that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm afraid that young people especially are losing the appreciation and the understanding of how important place is.
And as an educator, I think you hit it on the nail. I think that is the case, and so on social media and some TV shows, from what I understand, they have these little clips and they'll ask the average American, how many states are there? Or where is this particular place? Or something like that. And people often don't know. They often don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think you're correct with that. And, I mean, I think it's important to know where things are. I was just speaking with a friend the other day about, there was a person that doesn't live here in the country, and they have this stereotypical idea of America, and say they thought, hamburgers and hot dogs, that's American food.
Yeah, yes.
But I said, this is a very diverse place with different cuisines, probably just as much as Europe as a whole. I mean, you go to New Orleans, you're eating crawdads and alligator and po' boys.
Yes.
You go into Maine, you're eating lobster. You go to Maryland, you're eating crab. You go inland, and because of that place, you may be eating steak or barbecue or stuff like that. And the mountains and the proximity to the ocean or lakes, that all determines what you eat, and what you eat determines sometimes your traditions or what
what culture you are immersed in at the time.
Right.
If you're in southern Texas, you're eating Tex-Mex. Not traditional Mexican, but Texas Mexican.
Right. Some people believe, I also did, that nachos were Mexican. I mean, they're a derivative of Mexican food, but they're American food.
Yeah.
Yeah. From what I understand, I think even burritos. I mean, but they've adopted them though. So, okay. Well, fair enough with the map. Your observations with the map, I think a lot of that's true. You should, looking at a map and being able to see where things are, and knowing the location will help you understand that culture. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, there are a lot of people out here listening, and and a lot of women in particular. And I wanted to know, what advice do you offer to women and to men also, who are interested in pursuing growth-oriented experiences, whether it be travel or new experience in general? What thoughts do you have?
I guess my initial thought would be, follow your curiosity and your dreams about seeing other cultures. Just do it. We all most of us have a limited amount of money and time to travel. But any travel that we do, I think, makes us a better educated culture, a better educated people, and more able to understand why other cultures exist as they do. I think we become better citizens, and we're become more open to understanding other cultures because we travel.
Wherever you go, you take a place of that peace and the things you learn there with you. And you can't let that go. You can't undo that. And it informs your thoughts, it informs your decisions, it informs the way you live your life, and often for the better. So,
yes.
So with that said, thank you so much for speaking to me. It means
it was
a lot. You are my hero. You really are.
A hero.
Well, I just, there's so many people you encounter in your life, and, there's so few that actually inspire you. And to see all the things you've done and when you've done it and how you've done it. I mean, I walked around your home and see all your little relics of things you picked up. And it's just,
souvenirs.
It's so amazing to see. And it's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to have you share you with my Novel World friends. So thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you very much.
For sure. All right. Thanks for joining me on the Novel World Travels podcast. Subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Join me on my community on Facebook. That's / Novel World Travels, and Instagram, Novel World Travels. And join me on my webpage, which is novelworldtravels.earth. And remember, life is outside. And if you can't get there, join me and my friends on the Novel World Travels podcast. I love you all.